Welcome to the iPad Podcast, a weekly podcast from Mac's Future.
Okay, welcome to episode 105 of the iPad Podcast. This is Lex at Mac's Future. Today is July 11th, 2012. The podcast has come out a little late, but there's a lot of iPad news to talk about. And remember, this is a chit-chat-free podcast all about the iPad, iPad apps, iPad news, iPad devices. And so you can support it by going into iTunes and giving it positive review. That would help other people find this commercial-free podcast. At least the audio version of this is commercial-free. On YouTube, there are, I guess some YouTube ads, but other than that, it's commercial-free and it's chit-chat-free. So please support it. So let's get to the news and apps and devices. So the big news last week was a story from the Wall Street Journal, and then I guess Bloomberg reported it too, that Apple is going to be coming out with a mini iPad tablet. And the Wall Street Journal reported that component suppliers in Asia are preparing for mass production in September of a new tablet computer with a smaller screen. People familiar with the situation said. Now this comes on the heels of Google announcing its own 7-inch tablet, the Nexus 7. And Bloomberg also reported that Apple's going to be making a tablet computer. And a lot of people are saying it's going to have a 7.85-inch diameter. Now, I think this makes sense, even though, remember, Steve Jobs famously said a couple of years ago that 7-inch tablets didn't make any sense, that they were too small to be useful, and that you would have to file your fingers down to teeny size to use them. Now, personally, I didn't really understand that remark because, in a way, the iPhone and the iPod Touch are tablets, right? They have a touch screen, they're flat, and they have only a 3.5-inch diagonal screen. So why can't you make something smaller than Apple's 9.7-inch diagonal screen for the iPad? So personally, I think a mini tablet makes sense for two reasons: price and weight and size. Now, I have the 3rd generation iPad, and I've had the 1st generation and the 2nd, and I was a little disappointed with the launch of the 3rd generation iPad because it was a little heavier and a little thicker than the 2nd generation iPad. And in my mind, making these tablets thinner and thinner and lighter is the goal in the long run. But I understand why Apple did it, because Apple came out with the Retina display, which is, incredible pixel density. And that takes a really strong battery and strong processors. So to accommodate a bigger battery, Apple had to make the iPad 3rd generation a little heavier and a little thicker. That being said, I think one of the reasons that the Kindle, the regular Kindle, not the Kindle Fire, has done so well is because it's small and very light and portable, and you can hold it with one hand when reading. Now with the iPad, you can't really hold it with one hand when reading. Your hand will get too tired. You want to drop the iPad. So I do think it makes sense, given that Apple's seeing some, competition from the Kindle Fire and the Nexus 7 on the lower end, to come out with a tablet. So to me, the other component would be price. The entry-level 3rd generation iPad goes for $500, and they're still selling the iPad 2nd generation for $400. So, should Apple go with a lower-priced iPad? Well, the Kindle Fire, I think, goes for $200, and so does the Nexus 7. Both Amazon and Google said that, they're not making any money really from selling those things. They're hoping to make money from advertising in the case of Google, and maybe from the selling of content and products in the sense of Amazon. So, right now, the only $200 tablet that Apple has is the iPod Touch, which is only 3.5 inches in diagonal. So maybe Apple could come out and, like it did with the iPod series, remember, when the iPod came out, there was the regular iPod, and then they came out with the iPod Nano, and then the iPod, what was the little teeny one that's like $50 or $70? I forget. But there was a whole range of them leading up to the iPod Classic now. So I do think it makes sense, just also from a price point of view, to have a cheaper iPad that's maybe only 7 or 8 inches in diagonal. So I think this totally makes sense. Now, one blog called GottaBeMobile.com claimed to have exclusive pictures of the new iPad mini engineering sample photos. And so, I mean, you don't see much in this. You see, I don't know if this is like a mock-up or whatever, but they claim that the iPad mini will be thinner than the current iPad. And they say that the iPad mini should be around 213.36 millimeters tall and about 143.67 millimeters wide. And this is approximately 2/3 the size of the new third generation iPad, which is 241.3 millimeters tall and 9.39 millimeters thick. By comparison, the Nexus 7 has a width of 120 millimeters, which means that if the iPad mini is correct in terms of the calculations they made, it might be around 23.67 millimeters wider than the Nexus 7. And it says here that it looks like the display will be about 7.85 inches in diameter. And there's a rumor that it's going to have what's known as a IGZO display from Sharp, which stands for indium gallium zinc oxide, which will allow the Apple to offer an iPad with a thinner screen, according to this blog, and better brightness. And also the blog claims, this post on Gotta Be Mobile says that Sharp's IGZO displays can handle 330 ppi. So they're speculating that the iPad mini could very well be a Retina display. So that would be interesting if Apple goes with a Retina display. And 3G in it. So we'll have to see. I mean, I think if Apple's going to price the iPad mini more than the $200 for the Kindle Fire or the Nexus 7, it's going to want to have something a little more than they have. And one thing more is to have cell phone data connectivity, because the Fire and the Nexus 7 don't have that, just Wi-Fi connectivity. And obviously the ecosystem that Apple has in terms of apps and, you know, films and music and books and whatever is arguably much wider than Google, and definitely in terms of apps wider than what Kindle Fire can offer. But it would be nice if you could put some other hardware in there. Like the Google's Nexus 7 only has a front-facing camera. It would be nice if the iPad mini had front and back-facing cameras. And it would be nice if it had a Retina display, which I think is easier to do with a smaller tablet. So I think it's very exciting. I think it'd be great if Apple came out with a tablet, mini tablet iPad. Now, during Fireball's John Gruber, who's probably one of the best Apple experts out there who's blogging, had a very interesting post on Monday 9th, July 2002, entitled, "Let's Try to Think This iPad Mini Thing All the Way Through." And he thinks about it, and he makes some decent conclusions regarding whether or not it would work. And he basically points out you can make your own little simulator to see if a 7.85-inch iPad will work. He says ends up a 7.85-inch iPad display would be about as tall physically as the current 9.7-inch iPad display is wide. And then he does the math. He says 1024 pixels divided by 163 pixels per inch equals 6.28 inches for the purported iPad mini height. Then he goes on to say 768 pixels divided by 132 pixels per inch equals 5.8 inches for the current iPad width. Not exact, but close. And he says the rumored iPad mini would actually be half an inch taller than the existing iPad is wide. So he says you can make your own iPad mini simulator, take a screenshot of your iPad, then view the screenshot on the iPad, but rotate the device. This shrinks the screenshot to fit, almost exactly the same reduction in size as the reported iPad mini. So he basically says it should be able to work, and he thinks that maybe Apple, previously recommended to developers that there be at least 44-point or larger targets for all iOS devices. And then Gruber points out that then this would make it so that it would fit in the iPad mini. He says, I think there's a method to Apple's madness in recommending 44-point or larger tap targets for all iOS apps, both on the iPhone and the iPad, despite the fact that on the iPad, as we know it, each point is physically larger than a point on the iPhone or iPod Touch. He goes, a 44-point target on the rumored iPad mini would be exactly the same physical size as a 44-point tap target on the iPhone. And he says this is a classic Fitts law problem, and Fitts law states that the ease of hitting a target is a function of both the size of the target and the distance to get there. So you want to have bigger targets on bigger displays because there's more distance for your pointer. So anyways, it sounds like, a 7.85-inch tablet, according to Gruber would, allow enough room, for the fingers to hit icons. Now, he points out that Steve Jobs was attacking 7-inch tablets a couple of years ago, but he points out 7.85-inch diameter is closer to 8 inches. I don't think that I think Steve Jobs was saying at the time that anything smaller than the current iPad, which is 9.75 inches, is too small. So I don't think Steve Jobs, when he was saying 7 inches is too small, was sort of secretly suggesting that 8 inches would be okay. I think he was just, at the time, trying to diss the competition. Steve Jobs always did that. He famously said there would be, it didn't make sense to put video on the iPod, and then he put video on the iPod. He didn't want to have native apps on the iPhone, and then he wanted HTML5 apps or web apps. And then, of course, he launched, after a year after the iPhone was launched, he launched native apps in an app market. So, I think even John Gruber thinks that this could happen. He says, we could point all these things, but in the end, none of them matter. All that matters is whether a smaller iPad would actually be good. If Apple ships it, it will be judged on its own merits. So, that's an interesting perspective. Now, ZDNET.com had an interesting story about the iPad mini speculation from someone named Adrian Kingsley Hughes on July 11th. And I have the links for that in the show notes, entitled iPad mini, how much would you pay for one? But the point of his article is, how is Apple going to price it? And he basically looks at iSupply research, which and he put it in a spreadsheet on the blog. What are the bills of material or the cost in making the iPad 2 and the third generation iPad? Because his whole point is Apple, whatever price it sets for something, Apple wants to have hefty profit. Now, what he points out in this chart is that let's take the new third generation iPad. According to him, the cost of the 16 gigabyte one for the cost of material and manufacturing is $316, and that's being sold for $499. So it's making a hefty profit on that. And he basically says, look, the materials cost $306, and the cost of making actually manufacturing any of the third generation iPads, Wi-Fi or whatever size, is pretty much $10. The one with the 4G connectivity in it, add another 75 cents. So it's $10.75. And then the second generation iPad, which sells for $400, 16 gigabyte one, that one, the cost of the material and the manufacturing is $245. So the question is, how much would it, and the manufacturing costs are $8.15 for the Wi-Fi version and $8.45 for the 3G version. Now, how much could Apple cut the costs? Now, if you look at the components, the display is the most expensive part of the display and the touch screen. So on the third generation iPad, the display is which is a Retina display. It's $87, and the touch screen is $40, right? And on the second generation one, the display is $57, and the touch screen is $40. But let's say they used the Retina display and the Retina touchscreen, but they used smaller parts. How much smaller would that be? And it could be significant because the space is going to be much smaller that it covers. And let's say it can get a Retina display for a much smaller screen down to, I don't know, $50, or and the touch screen down to $30. So that's $80 instead of $97. So maybe it could save $20 right there. So the trick is for it to get the costs down under $200. And maybe Apple can get the cost down to, let's say, what other things could it get the cost down on? For example, the battery. The batteries are going to be much bigger on the bigger iPads. The 32-inch one has a $32 battery, while the iPad 2 has a 22.75 battery. Let's see. So what if it cut that down to, I don't know, $30? So, and power management, that's $10 for the third generation iPad. So, I don't know. I mean, Apple's probably going to have to get the cost of manufacturing and the supplies. If it can get it down to $175, then Apple could maybe sell it for $250 or $275. If it sold it for $275, that would be a hefty margin. So, I mean, I think this guy makes a lot of sense in terms of, but we don't know. We don't know what the costs are. But obviously the costs of making it are going to be a big factor for Apple, because Apple's not going to sell anything like Google or Amazon does with a very small margin, because Apple's all about having a decent margin of like somewhere between 30 and 40%. So he makes, I think, very good points. Now, with all this iPad talk, it's very interesting. There's a great blog post and a website called 52, that's number 52, tiger.net, and by David Coolo, and the loopinsight.com had the link, and that's how I found it, so I should give them credit. But basically, he's got this very fascinating post entitled Brief History of the iPad Prologue. And the whole point is that, you know, this dream of having like a touch tablet goes back, way back. And he points out, he starts off with something built by Alicia Gray. And he says, Alicia Gray was an electrical engineer and inventor who lived in Ohio and Massachusetts between 1835 and 1901. And he built something called the teletograph. And if you look at the picture of this thing, it looks like some weird device where you write something down. And he said the teletograph let a person use a stylus that was connected to two rheostats, which managed the current produced by the amount of resistance generated as the operator wrote with the stylus. That electronic record was transmitted to a second telotograph, reproducing the author's writing on a scroll of paper. Mostly, Gray noted that since the scroll of paper was moving, certain letters were difficult or impossible to produce. You couldn't, for example, dot an I or cross a T. You had to do something else. So apparently this device, he says, was a hit with hospitals and such. He also shows that the patent office awarded a patent to Mr. Hyman Ely Goldberg in 1918 of Chicago for his invention of the controller. He says this device concerned a movable element, a transmitting sheet. A character on said sheet formed a conductive ink and electricity-controlled operating mechanism. And then he says in the 50s, there was something called the stylator and the RAND tablet, both of which used a pen and tablet surface for input. He said the RAND, which he has a picture about, was cost at the time in 1960 $18,000, and it doesn't really look anything like the tablet does now. He says in 68, a computer scientist named Alan Kay, he described his concept for a computer meant for children called the Dynabook, which would be thin, lightweight, and shaped like a tablet. So he made a paper describing this, and that it would be, he said that the visual display would be able to present 4,000 printing quality characters with the contrast ratios of a book, and that it would weigh no more than 4 pounds. So he was dreaming up such a thing. And then Apple apparently had a tablet in 78, and it says the first commercial tablet produced from Apple appeared in 1979. The Apple Graphics tablet was meant to complement the Apple II, and used something called the Utopia graphics system developed by the musician Todd Rundgren, but apparently caused radio frequency problems, so the FCC made them stop it. What else? Then after that, Apple created the Newton Message Pad, which was, I guess inspired on that earlier one. There's also Knight Ridder put together a demonstration in 1994 of a digital newspaper using like a tablet-like device. And then right before the iPad, there were these like sort of weird tablets. There was the Axiotron ModBook, which is essentially an Apple MacBook modified into a tablet configuration, and the Motion Computing LS800. And then they talk about pop culture. Star Trek had something known as the Personal Access Display Device. So look, I think a lot of the Android lovers are going to basically say, hey, look, the concepts of the iPad were there already. But you know what? I think patent law is going to be more than just having just some generic concepts. It's about execution and patenting a method to actually make something like the iPad. And I think there were these patents for other things and, other way to like do stuff with like hand gestures or writing, but it's certainly not anything close to what the iPad is now. Now, there's been a little bit of a kerfuffle because Apple recently pulled a lot of its products, I think all of its computer products and the iPad and other stuff, from something known as EPEAT, which is a U.S. government list of environmentally friendly products. And Apple pulled it, and a lot of people are saying, oh, look, Apple is not environmental friendly anymore because it's making things like the MacBook Retina display, which is, glued together and hard to disassemble, difficult. And obviously the iPad's probably hard to disassemble. And so a lot of people are saying, look, Apple's abandoning being environmentally correct, but you can still donate and give back your stuff to Apple, and they'll recycle them. But Apple did issue a response via the loopinsight.com, a blog that follows Apple. And this is what Apple said, according to Jim Dalrymple. He said, this is the quote from Apple, Apple takes a comprehensive approach to measuring our environmental impact, and all our products meet the strictest energy efficiency standards backed by the United States government. Energy Star 5.2, end quote. Apple representative Christine Hougeot told The Loop, quote, we also lead the industry by reporting each product's greenhouse gas emissions on our website, and Apple products are superior in other important environmental areas not measured by EPEAT, such as removal of toxic materials. And it goes on to say, it's important to note, this is Dalrymple, that in addition to not measuring toxins in other environmental areas, EPEAT also doesn't measure smartphone or tablets. Clearly, these are two areas that are vitally important for Apple and not covered by EPEAT. And then Dalrymple points out that companies like Dell have 171 products listed on EPEAT, but none of Dell's computers as listed on their websites are Energy Star compliant. And he points out that EPEAT certifications by its own admission are old, and the EPEAT person said, quote, part of its expanding EPEAT's global reach through the multiple certification process, as well as moving it into new additional products, as well as updating the EPEAT certification because they're a little long in a tooth, is a huge project on its own. This is said by Christine Irvin, an EPEAT board member, told GreenBiz in March. So basically, Dalrymple says the hubbub over Apple pulling out of EPEAT is interesting because the products that were listed as gold products by the environmental organizations are the same ones Apple is currently selling. And Dalrymple says Apple has done more than any other technology company in recent memory to be environmentally friendly. So, this is a little weird, the whole thing, because is EPEAT really the standard for environmental, correctness? Or is Energy Star? Or does Apple have other stuff going on? So it's a little weird. I think EPEAT standards are sort of for the classical old computers being recycled and doesn't really take into account what you're doing with tablets and smartphones. We've heard about some of Apple's successes in the United States enjoining Samsung from selling, let's say, the Nexus smartphone or the Galaxy Tab tablet. But one of the more funny court rulings, which did not go in Apple's favor, comes out of England, and Bloomberg reported on it on July 9th. So apparently Apple was seeking an injunction in England against Samsung's Galaxy tablets. But the judge there, who's not very friendly to people enforcing patents, issued a legal ruling where he basically said there isn't going to be consumer confusion between Samsung's Galaxy tablet and the iPad because the Galaxy tablets aren't, and I'm quoting him, cool enough, end quote, to be confused with Apple's iPad. So he said, this is Judge Colin Briss, said in London court, he said the Galaxy tablets, quote, do not have the same understated and extreme simplicity which is possessed by the Apple design, end quote. He said, quote, they are not as cool, end quote. So I guess this is a victory for Samsung, but how is it going to help their marketing where the reason they win is because their products, according to a judge who's judging whether or not they resemble the iPad, is saying they don't resemble the iPad because they don't look cool. So it's pretty much a slap in the face of Samsung by this British judge who is allowing them to sell their uncool product. Now, the iPad continues to catch on in the enterprise, and there was a story on msn.foxsports.com. Apparently, the Denver Broncos have embraced the iPad playbook, according to that website. And it says here that apparently Peyton Manning loves the iPad. Peyton loves it, according to Broncos video director Steve Boxer. He's one of the first guys I dropped video into an iPad for. And I guess they mainly use it to watch videos of, the opponents and stuff like that. It says here, using the iPad is not mandatory this season, but Boxer told the Daily last month that 90% of the roster has made the switch from paper to tablet as Denver sheds a 500-pound playbook and DVDs by streaming both into a single app on 130 iPads with 64 gigabytes of data. And it has three main features: game film, playbook, and notifications. This is very cool, and I think you're going to see this more and more, particularly for sports teams. And it says here that other teams are doing this. The Baltimore Ravens and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers began using an app like this. And so did the Miami Dolphins began using it in the off-season. And but they have a caveat in Miami. Players will be fined $10,000 if they check out unauthorized websites while using it. So, look, I think this totally makes sense. I mean, the fact that it's mobile and can give you web content, videos, books, all of that is going to make it a fantastic playbook for sports teams. And think about, if sports teams are using them, how about other enterprise situations? How about lawyers who have to pack lots of exhibits when they go to trial or to a deposition or to a meeting, can pack all the documents onto an iPad. They can put the video depositions on the iPad. So, the iPad and as a tablet is just a great enterprise solution. And I think you're going to see not just sports teams, but everyday businesses and professionals using it. Macworld has a great article about how scientists are using the iPad, and I found this article via the Loop Insight, and I have a link to both Macworld and the Loop Insight, since they're the ones who showed me where this link is. And the article is by Joel Mathis of Macworld, and he's got a really great article here about how various scientists are using the iPad. He quotes someone named Chris Grant, who is a laboratory coordinator for Wanyeta College. And Grant says, quote, "We navigate to some fairly remote locations that require hiking. And a 2-mile one-way hike is not unheard of," he says. And he says, such hikes used to require a number of different tools: a topography map, a handheld GPS unit, a camera, a rangefinder, even a notebook to write down data. But now, he says, the iPad does all of that, and he uses apps like GPS Status, River Reader, and Smart Ruler to find his way around. And then in terms of following protocol, he says, he gives an example of a biologist at the University of Eastern Finland named Andrea Holm, and she says she's dispensed with notebooks and all sorts of protocols regarding, dealing with her research and stuff. She says she can enter her protocols at the service's website. There's a free web service. There's a free app called Lab Guru, and she uses, I guess they have a website, and you enter in data through the app. She says the app not only guides her experiments, it lets her record results. And what else? He cites somebody named Ben Horton, an associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Earth and Environmental Science, and she uses Google Earth app to find locations. And basically, he just has a whole array of stuff that scientists are using the iPad with, and it's really, really, really cool. And I think, here's another example of the enterprise. It can do so many things. We forget that it has a gyroscope and a GPS ability, as well as a video camera. So you can use it for a lot of things, I guess, if you're a scientist. Now, I never had heard of Lab Guru, but I took a look at it on in the App Store, and it's described as a companion app to the Lab Guru web application. The app enables Lab Guru users to conduct and update their experiments from the lab bench. The app makes it possible to run and track multiple experiments, record notes and results while performing an experiment, and to sync the data with the Lab Guru web application. So this is pretty cool. I didn't even know this existed. It's a way to sort of be organized and keep track of everything you're doing. So it's it's pretty cool. Now, I guess we're getting close to Apple announcing its results for the quarter ending June 30th, 2012. I think on July 24th, Apple's going to come out with its earning results. And Fortune has an interesting story on the Apple 2.0 blog from Philip Elmer DeWitt on July 8th entitled, "How Many iPads Did Apple Sell Last Quarter?" Now, nobody knows. Only Apple knows, and Apple's going to release that probably on June 24th. But the various pundits, the various analysts, both professional and amateur, all have guesses. And according to Philip Elmer DeWitt, the analyst estimates range from as low as 12.7 million iPads to 24 million. So that's a really wide range, of guesses, right? I mean, one range is almost double the amount of the lowest range. So he says, as of Monday, July 9th, Philip Elmer DeWitt has seen 61 estimates, 28 from professionals who cover Apple for banks and brokerage houses, and 33 from a rapidly growing contingent of independent Apple analysts, bloggers, and long-term investors. And at least one day trader who started a multi-million-dollar Apple hedge fund. That's kind of strange. The independent people are more bullish than the pros. So, it's unclear. What's interesting is analyst Horace Daydu, who's got that great Simco blog, he's got the most guessed. He's guessing 24 million, which is really high. I don't know. I mean, obviously, the market's expanding, but one thing that's interesting is that the third generation iPad has not started selling yet in China. So when that comes, that's going to really fuel the sales, I think. So we'll have to see. Clearly, Apple's iPad expansion is going well. I think Apple's doing well because I think in enterprise in particular, more and more companies are buying the iPad, and more people, I think, are buying it internationally. So I'm going to side with the bullish people in terms of guessing how many iPads were sold. So, Philip Horace Daydu is a pretty smart guy, and so maybe he'll be right. We'll see. Okay, so in terms of interesting apps, TED, that conference service that has great speakers and they put up these videos, they've just launched a TED Books app. And I guess it was most recently updated July 3rd. And basically, here's the description. TED Books are short, original electronic books produced every 2 weeks by the TED conferences. Like the best TED Talks, they're personal and provocative and designed to spread great ideas. The TED Books are typically under 20,000 words, long enough to unleash a powerful narrative, but short enough to be read in a single sitting. And it goes on to say, with the success of the TED Talks, has demonstrated that millions of people around the world are hungry to absorb new thoughts and perspectives with more demands than ever on people's time. So they have this book coming out. I guess the books aren't free. The books sell for, it looks like, $2.99. The app is free, and then you can get TED All Access for $15. So it's not, like many things in the App Store, free doesn't mean free. It says TED Book offers a 3-month 6-book subscription for $14.99, automatically renewed until canceled. Every 2 weeks we'll have a new title available for download. Founding subscribers, those who join within 90 days of our launch date, may also download titles from the back catalog for free. So that's a big incentive to join right now. Individual books will be $2.99 to non-subscribers. And apparently they're experiencing slow connection services because they're inundated with demand issues from the people who are using this. It also works on the iPhone. So let's see the ratings. The ratings, I guess, one person writes 1 star. This is an official TED app, at least by name. The app does not feel as if anyone at TED cared for it. Well, it got some 1 stars. while the information says version 1.03, the version being downloaded is 1.02. And so some people are saying that the app wasn't working. So the app may be kind of buggy, according to the feedback. Now the app itself is free, so maybe you sort of download it and see what free stuff you can get, and then if it's still buggy, just delete it and maybe wait a while and then download it again. So we'll have to see. Now, Apple's won some victories against Samsung and others in the patent wars, but it continues to try to get patents for the stuff it's done, and the one it got most recently could be big trouble for a lot of its competitors. Patently Apple, a great website for following the patents that Apple gets or applies for, has a great article entitled "Apple Wins a Major Integrated Multi-Touch Screen Patent and More." So apparently here they're saying that the U.S. Patent Office published a series of 23 newly granted patents for Apple. This is on yesterday, July 10th, and they say that they focus on a single major patent relating to Apple's all-important multi-touch technology that allows iDevices to be thinner, brighter, and require less power. And Patently Apple says, we close our report with a look at industrial design wins out of China. And anyways, basically they say, one of the major patent relates to displays, including display pixel stack-ups, and more particularly to touch sensing circuitry integrated into the display pixel stack-up of a display. More importantly, the patent also covers aspects of Apple's multi-touch technology. And it says here this could very well end up being a major patent that Apple's legal team could take advantage of in future litigation. So it really has to do with Apple's ability to make really compact, thin touch display. And it basically, the patent, I think it relates to something that Patently Apple says is Apple states that overlaying a display with touch sensor panel can have drawbacks. So Apple's solution is having touch sensing circuitry integrated into the display pixel stack up of a display, such as an LCD display. So in other words, have the touch circuitry in the glass itself. And it says here, circuit elements in display stack-ups can be grouped together to form touch sensing circuitry that senses a touch on or near the display. So this is apparently a major breakthrough. And really, I mean, this is important because what people value is just having really thin devices that are very touch sensitive. And so if Apple can make the glass display thinner and not have to put another layer of touch dispensing material on top of it, that's a huge, huge breakthrough. So, I mean, this is pretty complicated stuff. So I have a link to this on the blog, on the show notes for this podcast. So you want to check it out. But Patently Apple has a very detailed report about the significance of this patent. And I don't know, if I was in the Android world or Samsung's world, I'd be a little nervous. Good news if you're a Google Plus user like I am. Google finally updated the Google Plus app, so it's not just this sort of left behind iPhone app that works on the iPad, but now it's a universal app that scales up and looks nice on the iPad, and they've redesigned it. And so here are some of the new features. It has a new iPad optimized layout, which brings your stream to life according to their to the iTunes store. It says share photos directly to events for all your friends to enjoy. You can now initiate a video chat with up to 9 friends with mobile hangouts. You can turn on instant upload to sync photos from your phone to private Google Plus album. You can chat with a friend or all your friends at once with Messenger from your phone. You can check out what's hot stream to see popular posts, and you can view the nearby streams to see what people near your location are saying. And you can see vibrant, high-resolution images on the Retina display devices. And so this is version 3.0, full iPad support. It has Google Plus events in it, which some people don't like. And you can start and join Hangouts. And you can attach instant upload photos. So this is a huge update huge update, and my initial impressions are pretty good. For the video portion of this podcast, why don't I show you what it looks like? Okay, so this is what it looks like, Google Plus now. I'm going to look at it in portrait mode. So you basically have this little toggle area that shows you like an index on the left. The home button's at the top, and you click it, you go to the home button, profile, hangouts, find people, settings, and notifications. So let's see, home just brings you to a stream. Now it's very photocentric. So I have these circles: best, family, following, friends, invites, iPad, podcast, listeners, Scoble, like, because Scoble has so many points, I put him in his own circle. The thing is, it's kind of picture-centric, sort of like Flipboard, but it's a little different. It's you get these sort of tiles, and let's say if I click on a Scoble post, here's a random one. You get sort of this like part of it, on the bottom, so it doesn't fill up the whole screen. It's just like his little message, but you can scroll up and you can see all the comments. So that's kind of cool. Look at this. I'm scrolling. You can scroll all the comments, which is pretty neat. But Scoble here, he's got, wow, I don't know, he's got 54 comments, so it's pretty long. And then if you want to respond, the big comment box pops up. So it's pretty cool, at least that part is. And if you want to write something, you got a little button there for either writing a comment, a photo, or I guess to maybe pin where you're located. Let's see what else. If you want to close it, you click somewhere else. Now under profile, you have your profile. Got my profile there for Lex McFarley. And if you want to start a hangout, it shows you people you may know if you want to follow maybe their hangout or invite them, and then you just press a blue button and then ring on, I guess, if you want to be notified of like a new hangout. And if you want to find people, it suggests a whole people you may know to add them to your circle. And what else? I don't see where the notifications are. You've got settings. Oh, the notifications, I guess, are just sort of listed there on the left. So I think it's a huge improvement because, I mean, the version that you had before was just an iPhone version, and now you have an iPad version. I mean, personally, I think it's too photo-centric. I mean, I would like it to be a little more text-centric, but I know a lot of people are sort of visually stimulated and they like photos. That seems to be the trend with Flipboard and also the trend with Facebook. So anyways, it's free, and I think it's a pretty good app. Cult of Mac had a very interesting article entitled, I guess this came out on July 10th, the Secretary of the Navy wants iPads for executive dining in the Pentagon. So hopefully this won't lead to a scandal. We've had all these scandals with some federal agencies wasting money and stuff like that, and hopefully this isn't a boondoggle. And here the article is by Ryan Faas, F-A-A-S, and he says, we've seen the iPad used in a range of workplaces, although some are surprising, like industrial farming in the Vatican. And it says the U.S. Navy is planning to use iPads in a way that is both pedestrian and very high-end. And apparently, according to a recent government contract that is up for bid, the Navy plans to include iPads in a revamp of the executive dining facility in the Pentagon. And it says the setting may be one associated the upper echelons of federal government. And in the contract says iOS setup and configuration, and so they're not sure exactly what. I mean, that's all the contract says, but Cult of Mac says that this could mean that that iPads would be used by the servers or managers in the 5-star dining facility. So this is just a clue that they found in a contract that there's going to be something iOS related in the dining hall. So that would be pretty cool. I mean, I do think you're going to see in restaurants and in dining facilities things like the iPad as an easy way to update the menu, or even display. You could have various food stations and have an iPad embedded there and just update the menu instead of, redoing a cardboard sign or anything like that. One of the goofier but resourceful articles I read about is from TUAW.com. They had an interesting article from Stephen Sanday entitled "Convert an Old iPad into a Dedicated e-reader." Now, old iPads, first generation, are still very good devices that can run many apps. So I'm not sure why you would want to convert it into a dedicated e-reader. He does point out, though, that iOS 6 will not work on the first generation iPad. And he says, he says, sure, you could still run iOS 5 and all your previous apps, but Macworld's Lex Friedman has a better idea. And I guess the article is originally by Lex Friedman. Turn an old iPad into a dedicated e-reader. So let's go to that link here. And and he basically says, look, he agrees that it's counterintuitive, but he says, after all, your iPad can take on lots of tasks, from surfing the web to marshaling an army of Angry Birds. But he says, try as you might, you simply can't ignore the other tantalizing distractions your iPad has to offer. So Lex Friedman is saying you could make it just a dedicated e-reader so that you're not distracted, and also because iOS 6 won't run on it. So configuring your iPad, he says, any iPad, of course, can function as an e-reader, but if your goal is to make the iPad a dedicated reader, there are some settings you ought to consider tweaking, mostly to minimize distractions. And he says, you should remove hidden away or hide away potential app distractions. Make sure that even the apps you're not ready to part with won't distract you. And then head over to the Settings app and tap on Notifications. iOS 5 lacks a global switch to turn off notifications, so it's a good thing that you delete. It's a good thing you delete it. So, anyways, he's basically saying, go to the notifications page, and make sure you delete those apps that give you notifications. And then he basically says, just get like e-reader apps. He says, put bluntly, get the apps you need to read the content you want. If you like your dedicated e-reading iPad for books, grab Amazon's Kindle app and the iBook app, and or the Kindle Cloud Reader. So in terms of accessories, he says one accessory that might come in handy is some sort of lap stand. So, I mean, all you do to make it it sounds like all you do is delete a lot of apps that you don't use and put the notification center on so that you don't get notifications from apps that you don't want to. And then that's it. So, I don't know, it's kind of a silly article because we're all adults enough to use the iPad in any way we want, and if you want to use it as an e-reader, just keep launching the e-reader app. So it's kind of a silly, I think it's kind of a silly article by Macworld. Loopsinsight.com had an interesting link to an app that helps, I guess, kids communicate called Pro Loco To Go 2.0. And basically, what is ProLogo? It says it introduces two new research-based vocabularies, basic communication and core words. An analysis of commonly used sentences has shown that core words vocabulary reduces the number of steps to build a sentence. So it looks like it's an app that helps, I guess, people learn vocabulary. And it says here it's an award-winning augmentative and alternative communication solution for iPad, iPhone, and iPod Touch for people who have difficulty speaking or cannot speak at all. So this is really for people who are challenged in communicating. And it says here it can be adapted to suit the needs of a wide range of users with varying literary levels, featuring natural sounding voices. Speech can be generated by tapping buttons with symbols or typing using the on-screen keyboard. So it's a pretty powerful app. Let's see, if you wanted to buy it, how much does it cost? It's pretty pricey. In the United States, it's $190 in the United States. So it's a pretty, on the other hand, before the iPad, these devices were very, very expensive. And yeah, so it's $89.99. And let's see, it says here, it's really designed for children or people who've got incredible communication challenges, and it looks like it's pretty powerful. And the reviews are pretty high. They're 4 stars out of 458 ratings. So it just goes to show you how versatile the iPad is. I mean, the range of things that you see in the App Store. So this is pretty interesting stuff. So one of the cooler, I think, new apps that came out on the iPad is a magazine app, and it's been out on Android, but now it comes to the iPad, and it looks really kind of nifty. It's a free app to download, but here's the cool part. It's almost like it's like what is it? It's like a subscription model for getting all the magazines you want. So you pay a monthly fee, and then you get like magazines. So basically, it doesn't have every magazine ever made, but it gives you a lot of magazines, and you get it all in one app. And the magazines that you get are Allure, Better Homes and Gardens, Bon Appetit, Car and Driver, Coastal Living, Condé Nast Traveler, Cooking Light, Elle, Entertainment Weekly, Esquire, Essence, Fitness, Fortune, Glamour, Golf, Golf Digest, GQ, Health and Style, Money, Parents, People, People Style Watch, Popular Mechanics, Real Simple, Self, Sports Illustrated, Southern Living, The New Yorker, This Old House, Time, Vanity Fair, Vogue, Wired, and plus more. So it's pretty cool. Some of the ratings aren't so high right now. It doesn't have iPad Retina support yet, so some people are complaining about that. So I guess if you want to pay a subscription model, let's see, how much does it cost? Let's see. So the cheapest version is $10 a month, $9.99 per month, and you'll get unlimited access to digital editions of the entire catalog of magazines, custom design for your tablet. But I do think it costs more if you want certain magazines. So let's see. Browse all the titles, first 30 days free. But I read somewhere that if certain magazines are more expensive. So let's look at the unlimited plans. Oh, here we go. The premium plan is $14.99 a month, and for that you get everything in the unlimited basic, plus you get the New Yorker, People, Sports Illustrated for that extra $5 a month. So you don't get New Yorker, People, Sports Illustrated for the basic plan. So the basic plan does include a lot of magazines, including Esquire, Real Simple, Wired. So if you read a lot of magazines, $10 a month or $120 a year probably is worth it. And I guess, what is it, $180 a year if you get the $15 a month. So it depends on how much you read. If you get a lot of these magazines, it might be cheaper to get, let's say for $180, you get a whole bunch of magazines. You get, like in my case, let's see, I read The New Yorker, GQ, maybe Sports Illustrated, The New Yorker, Vanity Fair, Vogue, Wired. So, I'm going to do a calculation, because if this is, it might make sense for example, my family to get this for $14.99 a month. So anyways, it's pretty cool. It's on the iPad, and you should check it out. It's called The Next Issue. Finally, I should note that the Twitter app for both the iPad and the iPhone has been updated to version 4.3, and you've got expanded tweets. So when you view a tweet now, let's see, the iPad version, when you view a tweet, you see the detail in the link. You can see a preview of the content, view the images, play the video, and more in the app. And what else? It has enhanced experience around selected events with the best tweets, push notification for tweets, choose to receive notifications from people you follow anytime they tweet or are retweeted. You have ambient notifications, enable you to see brief, non-interruptive notifications in the status bar while you are using the app. Improvements to search and autocomplete for users, and the Discover now indicates when new stories are available for you to view. You have tappable avatars that take you directly to user profiles. So there's major improvements. So you might want to check out the Twitter app, which has lagged behind such apps as like Tweetbot. Okay, so that's it for episode 105 of the iPad podcast. This is Lex at Max Future. Thanks for listening, and please remember to go to the iTunes Store or the App Store and give this podcast a positive review. That's the only way that this podcast can really compete with the heavyweights and the big boys like Leo Laporte or the 5x5 Network. So support your independent podcaster. Thanks for listening, and see you next week.
This has been a Max Future production.